Hi everyone, this is Dr. Fox, and let's talk about the middle ear. In this video, we'll discuss the components of the middle ear, their surfaces, communications, ossicles, muscles, and nerves. The middle ear sits between the outer and inner ears. It's a mucosa-lined, air-filled cavity within the petrous part of the temporal bone. It includes the tympanic membrane, or eardrum, the three ossicles, the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. And it communicates with several other adjacent parts and spaces. So of utmost importance, it communicates via the oval window to the inner ear. And there's also a communication between the inner ear and the middle ear called the round window that allows for the expansion of fluid from the cochlea to move. There are also posterior communications in the middle ear to the mastoid air cells of the temporal bone, and anteromedial and somewhat inferior communications to the nasopharynx via the pharyngotympanic tube, also known as the eustachian tube or just the auditory tube. So let's take a look at some of the surfaces and spaces. So we can conceptualize the middle ear as kind of a box. So there is a roof to that space. Likewise, there is a floor to that space. There are lateral and medial walls, as well as a posterior wall, and not pictured here would be the anterior wall because we are looking at this space from the anterior. This cavity can be divided up into three cavities. Their location is dependent upon the tympanic membrane. So if we draw lines in line with the superior and inferior margin of the tympanic membrane, the epitympanum, or the attic, is above the tympanic membrane. This is going to include very few features, but notably that's where the head of the malleus is going to articulate with the incus. Inferior to that and in line with the tympanic membrane is the mesotympanum, also known as the tympanic cavity proper. And below that space is the hypotympanum. The hypotympanum also has very few features. It includes a portion of the pharyngotympanic tube, and also that's where the tympanic nerve is going to rise from. So let's talk ossicles. So there are three small bones, so ossicles, within the middle ear. These are homologous with jaw bones of our ancestral organisms, and the phylogenetic and developmental pathways of these bones are very well documented embryologically, phylogenetically, and paleontologically. The role of these bones is to conduct sound energy from the tympanic membrane all the way to the inner ear. And so let's start with the malleus. The malleus has various parts to it. The manubrium of the malleus, which we can see here, that's the handle of the hammer, lies upon the tympanic membrane. So as the tympanic membrane vibrates, so does the manubrium. The head of the malleus is going to articulate with a facet joint of the incus. And then there is a lentiform process of the incus, which then articulates with the head of the stapes. And the footplate of the stapes sits within the oval window. So we move from the tympanic membrane to the malleus, to the incus, to the stapes, to the inner ear. There are also skeletal muscles which are associated with these ossicles. Their role is to help dampen vibrations so as to protect the inner ear from too strong a vibration. And there are two. The first is the tensor tympani muscle. The tensor tympani muscle is contained within a canal that comes through the anterior wall of the cavity, and its tendon is going to cross the tympanic cavity proper and insert upon the manubrium of the malleus. It is innervated by the nerve to tensor tympani, which is a branch of V3. And I remember this because I think, where do you store tension? Well, I store tension in my jaw, and the muscles which move the mandible are all controlled by V3. So other muscles with tensor in their name, like tensor tympani, tensor veli palatini, etc., are all also innervated by V3. Another interesting fact about tensor tympani is that some people are able to voluntarily contract it to cause a roaring sound in their ears. So the easiest way to attempt to do this is to either force a yawn or yawn without moving any other portions of your anatomy, and you can hear that whirring sound. Otherwise, the tensor tympani tends to contract involuntarily with either very loud sounds or when a person themselves begins to phonate. The other skeletal muscle is the stapedius. The stapedius muscle originates from the pyramidal eminence of the temporal bone. That's on the posterior wall of the cavity, and it runs from that pyramidal eminence to the neck of the stapes. The stapedius muscle is innervated by the nerve to stapedius, which is a branch of the facial nerve. And we can see a ridge or prominence which is associated with the facial nerve canal that runs between the posterior and the medial walls there. There's also a prominence above that relates to one of the semicircular canals. So nerves which are traversing or moving through the middle ear. So let's start with branches of the facial nerve. There will be two. One, the nerve to stapedius, as we have already discussed, but the one that will be visible to the naked eye is chorda tympani. So chorda tympani branches from the facial nerve, and it is communicated through the tympanic cavity proper, and then it moves between the malleus and the incus. So the classic anatomical relationship when looking at the lateral wall, which includes the tympanic membrane, is to see chorda tympani running between the malleus and the incus. The other nerves which are moving through the middle ear are going to be branches of the glossopharyngeal nerve, cranial nerve 9. So as you recall, the tympanic nerve enters this space and then it ramifies into the tympanic plexus. That tympanic plexus is upon a feature of the medial wall called the promontory and is going to innervate the mucosa of the middle ear. It then begins to coalesce into the lesser petrosal nerve, which is on its way out of the temporal bone through the cranial cavity, ultimately destined to travel through foramen ovale along with V3, the mandibular division of the trigeminal nerve, on the way into the infratemporal fossa. That lesser petrosal nerve is what is destined to innervate the parotid gland. So let's take a look at some of the notable walls. Let's start with the lateral wall there. The lateral wall hosts the tympanic membrane. We should also be able to see the manubrium of the malleus, perhaps even chorda tympani. Let's take a look here at the photograph. So I'll outline. This is the tympanic membrane there. Here is the malleus there. Here we can see the incus, and between the two we can see chorda tympani. We can also see a part of the tendon of tensor tympani on its way to the manubrium of the malleus. And while we're here looking at this toward the anterior, the anteromedial and a little inferior, we can also see the pharyngotympanic or eustachian or auditory tube as it leaves the space on the way to the nasopharynx. Now let's take a look at the medial wall. So we're looking there. We can see a promontory. We can see a tympanic nerve coming. We can see tympanic plexus, so all of these rami, and then we can see the lesser petrosal nerve on its way up. We can also see the stapes there, so that would be the oval window through which sound vibration will enter the inner ear, heading toward the cochlea. Now let's focus on the posterior wall. Posterior wall, not pictured here. We can see the opening to the mastoid air cells. There's also the pyramidal eminence there for the stapedius. And we can see some of the eminences for the facial canal, as well as one of the semicircular canals. The anterior wall, not seen here, is going to host the pharyngotympanic tube, or the eustachian tube there. We can see adjacent to that is the canal that is going to host tensor tympani, and we can see its tendon exiting the canal there. That leads us to the question of this video, and that is, on which surface of the middle ear is the promontory located? Is it the anterior? No, the anterior surface is where the pharyngotympanic tube runs. The lateral? No, that's the tympanic membrane. The medial, yes, that is where the promontory is, and its association with the inner ear. Posterior, nope, that's the mastoidal air cells and the pyramidal eminence. That would be incorrect. So the correct response here is the medial wall hosts the promontory. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll talk to you in the next video.